Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jodo cast, your home for Star Wars gaming. We've got an exciting one for you because today we are interviewing Corey Konieczka about his upcoming game, The Mandalorian Adventures from Unexpected Games. Yeah, I'm really excited to have Corey with us today. Corey, if you just want to briefly introduce yourself, and then we can start digging deeper into this game.
Sure thing, Joe. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. My name's Corey Konieczka. As you said, I'm a game designer. I've been doing this for 19 years. I started out working for Fantasy Flight Games, so I did a bunch of Star Wars games over there. Star Wars Rebellion was probably my biggest hit, but I also helped out on Imperial Assault. I co-designed Star Wars Outer Rim. Yeah, he's wearing an Imperial Assault shirt right now. Um, and now I'm running my own small studio called Unexpected Games. We've put out a handful of games so far, and this this year we'll be releasing our first licensed game, which will be the Mandalorian Adventures.
Also, just close to my heart is Gears of War, the board game. I don't know
Yeah,
if a lot of people remember that or played it, but I still have that one, and I think it's great. But
that is a
so,
cult classic.
for those who might be unfamiliar, can you give an overview of the Mandalorian Adventures?
Absolutely. So this board game, it's a cooperative board game. It's for 1 to 4 players, and it lets you play out some of the key events from season 1 of The Mandalorian. So each player chooses a different character. There are 8 different characters in the game. Each character has their own unique deck of skill cards. And each of them plays very differently. They've got different tricks, different strategies, different combos that you can pull off depending upon which character you're playing. And so the gameplay itself, each game you play a mission. So there's a mission book. You open it up, you choose what mission you want to play, and each mission will have an objective and it'll have a failure condition. And these are pulled directly from some of the episodes of the show. And for example, the first mission, you are sent to recover the asset, which, as we learned to find out in the show, is the child Grogu. But he doesn't know that in the first episode. So you take on the role of the Mandalorian. One player, another player can be IG-11 if they want to follow the events of the story, or you can use sandbox mode. You can choose whatever characters you want. The game supports 1 to 4 players, so um, you will then start on this map and you will go out trying to find the child, fighting through a town full of mercenaries on your way there, and you will either succeed or fail, and then proceed on to the next mission, or choose what you want to do next.
I always remember that episode, and I'm like, why were those guys defending Grogu? Were they like protecting him? Were they like gonna sell him? Like, what was their deal? We never found out.
It's a good
Uh,
question. I don't know.
so Outer Rim and Rebellion are two of my favorite games of all time, hands down. I think Outer Rim is probably number one. How does it feel to just get to work on a Star Wars project again after these years?
Yeah, I mean, it was Star Wars is like my favorite IP of all time, and so it was a dream to be able to work on a single Star Wars game. Um, but when I left Fantasy Flight to start my own studio, I knew that I was staying within the same company, and I made it very clear that if the opportunity ever arises to do another Star Wars game, let me know. And for me, where I'm at as a designer, it's I'm very much driven by like trying to create something new, something different from what I've done in the past, because over the last 19 years I've made probably 30 different games. And I don't want to be retreading stuff that I've done again and again. I wanted to do something that felt fresh, something that hobby gamers could enjoy, but also a game that was a little bit more accessible than some of the stuff that I did for Fantasy Flight. And so I want anybody to be able to play this game, but for the people that want kind of to dive in deeper and to really have that juicy strategy, that's there for them too.
Cool. So, how was working on this game similar or different to the previous Star Wars games you've worked on?
Yeah, I mean, I think with working on any licensed game, my goal is to always try to capture the story and the feel of that particular IP, whatever it is. And I think that The Mandalorian is a very specific part of Star Wars. And so for me, I really wanted to capture the feel of the show. I wanted to capture what it felt like to be mercenaries in the Outer Rim going on these missions, as opposed to say something like Rebellion, where you are the rebels versus the Empire. And so I think there's obviously that theme angle where this is very specifically a Mandalorian game, but there's also the goal that I had as a designer. Like I mentioned earlier, I do want this game to be more accessible than some of my previous Star Wars games. So one thing that we've done in this game is the first game that you'll play of it is the gives you the bare bones rules of how to play the game. But as you play, you unlock new content. Now, I don't want this to be confused with like a campaign game. This isn't Gloomhaven where your character is growing with strength, because it wouldn't really make sense. Like you're playing these specific characters. You're not. This isn't a role playing game.
Sure.
But the goal here was to be able to slowly introduce new content and to slowly add the complexity of the game. So you start out with a deck that has 12 cards in it, and at the end of your first game, everybody gets a new card in their deck that has it's actually a new type of card that you that works very differently than the other stuff in your deck. And you move on to the second mission, which has a little bit more complexity to it. And so new cards, new mechanics get introduced over time. There are also these two envelopes in the box that say "Don't open until instructed to," and when you get to the right point, you open these up and they have tokens and rules and different things that they introduce that really add the additional depth that I think hobby gamers want, while keeping the core complexity of the game nice and low, so that you can play on novice mode with your family if you want to, if they're not huge gamers. Or you could
Right.
say, we're going to play on veteran and break out all the extra stuff and see if you can beat the hardest challenge in the game.
So in a way, it's I don't know what the if legacy is one of those terms that are copyrighted by somebody, but it's
It's
sort of
just a
one of those
loaded
games
term.
in a little way.
Um, People will make that comparison, but the important distinction is nothing gets destroyed in this game. You
Sure,
don't put
good.
stickers on anything. You don't tear up any cards. You could
Good.
play through and unlock everything. And if you wanted to, you can reset it and put it all back in the box. It's not so it's not a legacy game in that regards. It's more of kind of the onboarding of how we introduce rules. And I want those first few games to be really exciting as you're unlocking stuff and you're like, I wonder what's in here. Um, that was always the most fun part to me of playing a legacy game. Is just the mystery of like, ooh, I can't wait till we open that. What's it gonna do?
Right. I agree. I've only played I think it was only Risk Legacy. That was back when I was
Okay.
starting to get into board games, and that was the exciting part. Was like, what's in there, and it was not exciting to like have to like tear up a card. I'm like, oh, that feels bad.
Yeah. And so there are some things that we are making very clear are in the box. For example, one of the first unlocks that you'll get that we talk about on the back of the box is there's an optional trader mode.
Ooh,
Um, and this isn't something you have to use. There'll be plenty of people that are like, I just like playing co op. That's great. You can just play the game that way. But when I started designing this game, I kept seeing moments, especially in season one of the show, where the Mandalorian gets betrayed by the people that are so close to him. Even in the first episode, when he's working together with IG-11 and they finally find the child, he's going to rescue him. IG suddenly has his own programming and decides that he's going to kill the child. And so there's a moment of betrayal right there from the start. So this optional mode that you unlock early on gives you like a different way to experience the game, and it gives everybody a hidden motive where one of the players could be working against you depending upon how many people you're playing with.
So my next question, I feel like you've already answered. uh, so what makes the Mandalorian Adventures stand out from other Star Wars games and just other games that you've worked on? Um, Sounds like one of the big ways is sort of like you said, the accessibility and the sliding optional complexity of the game.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big element of it. I think this is probably the most accessible Star Wars game that I've worked on. Um, and like I said, we wanted to do that without sacrificing the additional complexity that the hobby gamers want. So it's a fine line to walk, but I think we did it.
How did this game come to be? So whose idea was it, and was it an easy process to get it off the ground and approved and all that stuff?
The idea was mine. I am a huge fan of the show, and I was inspired. And I said, you know what? I want to make a Mandalorian game. And so I pitched it to Lucasfilm, and they were excited, and we went through the whole process, and it all turned out great. So, um, yeah, I don't have any complaints.
Nice, that's great. Was the game always going to only focus on season one of the show?
Um, I think so. Like, there's just so much to cover, and I don't have any sense as to where the show's going. Right? Like, are
Sure.
they going to do more seasons? They announced a movie. Like, all of this stuff was unknown, especially at the time that I was starting work on this game a year and a half ago. So I thought it was best to just find a solid starting point of, well, this is a story that we want to tell. These are I can only fit so many characters and so many missions and so much content in a single box, and so it felt right. I feel like that was the plan from the beginning.
Why did you decide to go with sort of the storybook format rather than using tiles like in Outer Rim or Imperial Assault?
Yeah, I think the biggest uh, issue that I have with using tiles is just it adds a lot of setup time. You need to
Sure.
keep it all sorted in your box. And
Hmm.
like with Imperial Assault, once you have all the expansions, you're like digging through 4 or 5 different boxes, looking for the right figure, looking for the right tile. It's just really slows things down. Um, and so the first time that I played a storybook adventure game, I think it was Stuffed Fables on the Plaid Hat game. I was playing it with my daughter and my wife, and I was like, "This is awesome! Like the setup is so fast. You just like flip to the right page, put the figures in the right spot, and you're good to go." Um, Now those maps only use like one side of the map book, but we tried to make it a little bit more expansive. And over the years, I've seen a lot of other games kind of go down this path. I know Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion did that. Um, and there was a Lord of the Rings adventure book game that was similar. It wasn't like a spiral bound book, but it had like a book that you opened. Um, and so I really liked the idea of the fast setup time. And the important thing, once we chose that direction and we had that in mind, is I wanted to make sure that these missions were replayable and there was lots of extra content in the box. So there are the different maps that are in the book, but there are additional missions that you later unlock that you can play on any map. And even still, each of the core missions in the game are not they're not 100% scripted. There are a lot of unknowns where I've replayed some of these missions like dozens of times, and there's still a lot of unknowns about like where enemies are going to be, what cards are going to be drawn, where hidden features that you're looking for are going to show up. And so it was one of the challenges of using like a preset map like that is how do you make it so that it doesn't become stale. And I think we found a lot of ways of making those maps really um, reusable, replayable, and interesting.
Were there any mechanics or design challenges in the development process that were difficult to nail down for this game?
Um, yeah, I mean, there are plenty of things that I went back and forth on. The card play system in the game took a while to evolve to where it landed on. To give to paint a picture of how the core mechanic works, basically at the bottom of the map, there are 4 different action slots. Some missions have more than that, but these action slots are like the core things that you can do during the game. There's moving, attacking, there's intel, which lets you like look at face down tokens or move enemies, and then there's planning, which lets you get like defense cards and retaliation and that sort of stuff. So on your turn, you play 2 cards from your hand into these slots, kind of deciding what actions you want to do. If you want to move, you play a card into the move slot. And if it's got 4 strength, you can move up to 4 spaces. Sounds easy, right? Some of these cards have additional abilities that you'll get in addition to being able to play them on the slots. And there's some other bonuses. But that core system took a long time to develop into what it is now. And the final wrinkle that I think is what makes it really work and really interesting is that as you're playing cards in these slots, they're filling up. And at the end of a player's turn, you total up the value of all the cards in each slot. And if a slot is at 5 or more strength, then you need to resolve an event card. That's what makes the enemies activate, all the bad stuff happen to you. If you hit higher than 5, you resolve an event card, but before that, you have to resolve a crisis. And each mission has its own crisis, which is something awful happens, and then you do an event. So you've got the strategy of moving your characters around the board, fighting enemies, trying to find items hidden around the board. But you also have this mini game of trying to hit 5 exactly on these slots. And so you might have this really big attack that you want to do this turn, but because the player before you just did a big attack last turn, that might attract additional attention. And so you really have to kind of work together and be like, is it worth it? There's a lot of risk management. Is it worth me doing this turn? I don't know.
That's fascinating.
I love those excruciating decisions.
It's so much different than most. I love playing cooperative games, and most of them, we all do our turns, and then the enemy gets to do their thing. But I really like that. Sounds really fun and sneaky. The trying to work around those numbers and get it just right.
And some characters can interact with them in different ways. Like Xeon is a very sneaky character. She has ways of like discarding cards from other slots and doing weird stuff like that. So it was a way to simulate kind of stealth and how much attention you're pulling towards you. And I think it adds just an extra layer of strategy to players and the risk management that goes along with it.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting and interesting especially after I bet you've got a couple games under your belt, really understanding like, oh, okay, this is how we got to approach this situation.
Yeah, it plays a little different. And the first mission, we tried to make it like, we recommend that you play it on novice mode, and it's the simplest one to play. So it really kind of gets you started because it's one of those systems that, like you said, the more you play it, the more things start to click in your mind. You're like, oh, now I need to worry about this, or maybe I shouldn't do that. One last note on it is that, so if you play your cards and none of your piles hit 5, that means the enemies won't activate at all on your turn. But if you leave all the piles at high numbers, maybe that means the next person is going to have to resolve multiple events on their turn. And so there's this ebb and flow of when the enemies activate. And the last piece of information is that the top card of the event deck has an icon on the back of it. And that gives you information about what that event will do. So for example, it might show the marksman icon on it, sharpshooters. And that will tell you, oh, those enemies are going to activate on the next event. Maybe we should deal with that one that's really close to this player. Or maybe we should run away from them because we know that's about to happen. And so it's not just choosing when to resolve the events, but it's also having a little bit of information so that you can make informed decisions and work together.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, because like I said, I'm used to games that have sort of the AI deck, and you're like, well, we'll see what happens. But having just a little bit of like, oh, well, those guys are the guys that we got to watch out for. We don't know what they're gonna do, but we know they're up to something.
Yeah.
So this one, I think you already covered a little bit, but what's the replayability like in this game? You said it's not a
Hmm.
campaign.
Yeah, so it's not a campaign. We recommend everybody plays the first mission as their first game just because it's the easiest to play. Um, but then after each game, you'll gain new cards from the guide deck, and it'll hold your hand. It'll say, okay, for your next mission, we recommend you play this mission, but you don't have to. You could play a different mission if you wanted. So you've got the core missions in the book that you can play through. And like I said, I think they're very replayable. But then as you start unlocking new content, you start getting different mercenary missions and different mission types that are basically special missions that you can play on any map. And those kind of let you go back and revisit these locations, or you can always. There are also like challenges that we have where you can try to guess I'm speaking a little bit. There, let's just say that there's stuff that you unlock as you keep playing, and once you get through the guide deck, that provides lots of replayability and lots of goals and lots of reasons for you to go back and play this stuff.
How do the Can you walk us through maybe how some of the different characters differ from each other gameplay wise? I think you said there's 8
Yeah,
characters.
yeah. There's 8 characters. It's funny. I'm actually going to be posting a designer journal tomorrow that talks about exactly this. Um, so, uh, the Mandalorian, he's probably the most straightforward character. He's a walking arsenal. He's got like his blaster rifle on his back. He's got his standard blaster on his hip. He eventually gets his jetpack. He's got a flamethrower. He's got his whipcord, and so he's got lots of tools at his disposal, but mostly focuses on combat, right? That's kind of what you would expect for him. He's got a few like non-combat relating things, like he's got his tracking fob that he can use to be a little bit sneaky. But for the most part, he's the most straightforward way to deal with enemies. The complete opposite of him would be probably Grief Karga, who in the show he does use a blaster, and so he is able to fight, but that's not really his strength, right? He's got connections with the Bounty Hunters Guild. He's a little bit more manipulative of people. And so he's a lot more tricky, and his kit relies a lot on manipulating the enemies. And in fact, he can like pay off an enemy to make it attack another enemy. He can like sneak past them using his diplomacy. He can he can look at the top card of the event deck and control whether that one's going to happen next or not. And so he relies a lot more on kind of subterfuge and manipulation than the Mandalorian, who's a lot more about just fighting stuff. um, so each of the characters really has like their own little kit that they play off of. Another example would be Paz Vizsla, who um, his kit is very much around the planning cards. I didn't talk too much about them, but they are um, one of the mechanics that probably changed the most in development. You're asking about that earlier. Um, there's basically a deck of planning cards that one of your actions is you can draw a number of cards from this deck and you get to keep one of them. And these cards are things that let you block damage or retaliate against enemies or like draw extra skill cards. And you get to keep these cards in front of you until you decide to use it at some point in the future. Paz's kit revolves around using these, and the more of them he has, the more powerful he gets. And so he's collecting these. He's got extra ways of getting them. He's got ways of having other players get them. He's got a card called This is the Way, which lets any player do a planning action for free that he could use on himself or he could use on somebody else. And so um, his strategy is very different than the other players. And to me, the fun is that each of us are going to have our own character with their own little tricks, but then seeing how we can kind of use those together to complete these missions. One of my favorite Grief cards is called That's Going on My Wall. and it's when he was bringing the Mandalorian in to meet the client, and they were trying to like take the Mandalorian's helmet, and he says that you can't have that. That's going on my wall. The card effect lets him move another player or take one of their planning cards, which you can use to great advantage to like get someone just close enough to help you complete an objective or save yourself if you're about to die. But the real trick is that suddenly, if you're playing the hidden trader mode, it really opens up the types of things that you can do. You're like, oh, now I can move somebody else. That's interesting. Um, so whenever we play with the hidden trader mode, everyone's always suspicious of Grief Karga, even though it's he's just as likely being a traitor as just about anybody else. Um, but it's just he's so sneaky that it's I don't know. It's just happened too many times. We don't trust him anymore.
Fair enough. When can people expect to get their hands on this game?
So we are game is on its way, shipping to us right now. I don't like announcing an official release date until it's sitting in our warehouse because delays can happen, right?
Hmm.
Our hope is that it comes out in Q3 of this year. With any luck, it'll be at Gen Con, but we'll officially announce the release date as soon as it's in the warehouse and we know that we'll be able to hit that date.
Nice. That's a good time for me because that way I'll have all this moving done and out of the way by the time that comes along, so I can actually
Yeah.
dedicate time to checking it out.
So yeah, we'll be at Gen Con. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll be moving into a new house and spending all my money on that, so I won't be at Gen Con this year. But we will have, I think, two of our JodoCast guys will be there, so uh, I'll make sure they check it out.
Yeah, we're going to be demoing the game at our booth at Gen Con. We've also got events running for the Mando, and we've got some other fun little things that we'll be doing for it. Our real hope is that it's the game of the show, but we're doing everything we can to support it. We're a small studio, but we've got some support. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm very excited about it. As I mean, to be honest, as soon as I saw your name and Star Wars in the same like announcement, I was like, okay, this is going to be great. I'm
I
down.
appreciate it. And one of the challenges was making sure that it was different than the other games too, right?
Sure.
Like if someone goes in expecting that this is an Imperial Assault expansion, it's not. It's not Imperial Assault. It's a different game. It's I think it's focusing on the cooperative nature, of course, but also the accessibility of it. Um, but at the same time, I think it's important to have a game that offers something different. Like we don't want to buy the same game that's already sitting on our shelf, right? We want something new and fresh.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks really exciting. Just with, I mean, it's already so distinct, just being that storybook game. As far as I'm aware, it's the first Star Wars one that has the kind of the storybook mechanic, which
Yeah, I think you're right. And we do have before each mission in that storybook, we actually have an illustration that's like comic book style that shows like the events leading up to the game that we're about to play. I think it was a really interesting way of telling the story as opposed to just having like a block of flavor text that you read before your game. Um, and I think it does a good job introducing what's happening. It gives you some context, especially since it's probably been a while since you watched season one of The Mandalorian. Maybe not. Or you could be playing with someone that maybe hasn't seen it. Like I know my dad hasn't seen the show. He's a big Star Wars fan, though. I could play it with him, and he would he would understand from like the intro, like, oh, cool, that's what's going on, and would be able to hop right into it.
nice. Might have to like look at those and come up with like, okay, these are the timestamps. Watch this bit of this episode right before playing this mission for the extra kind of enhanced effect. I've seen, I think some of that art has been in the promo materials and on Instagram and stuff. It looks really cool.
Yeah, yeah, we've been sharing artwork all across our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook. Look up Unexpected Games, Instagram. And you can see a bunch of artwork we've been sharing: the maps, the character pieces, skill cards. It's mostly original art. I want to say 80 to 90% of it is brand new stuff that we commissioned just for this game. And there were a few pieces that were commissioned by Fantasy Flight Games or Atomic Mass that were in the same style that were made for other Mandalorian products. So we used a couple of their art pieces. They let us. They were very kind. But almost all of it's original stuff. And the artists really knocked it out of the park.
That's all the questions I have. If there's anything else you want people to know about the game, feel free to let them know.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're going to be at Gen Con this year. Um, if you're overseas, we're hoping to go to Essen as well. We haven't locked down those plans yet, but that is our dream. And just want to make this game as big a success as it can and try to get it in as many people's hands as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, and you can be sure to see more about this game from the Jodo cast whenever I get my hands on it because I'm really excited about it. And hopefully, we'll have our new setup all set up at our new house so we can record some games and do all that sort of stuff. Thank you so much, Corey, for joining us. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited about the game. I hope everyone else is excited about the game. And be sure to go play it at Gen Con if you have the opportunity to do that. And see ya around next time. I'm never good at outros. Bye.